For everybody who's here today, thanks for coming. And for those that are online, I hope you enjoy this. As Hailey said, yeah, from the Southwest. So if anybody needs subtitles on the accent, then we can arrange that. I'm sure the tech guys can sort that out. So as Hailey said, I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of protecting agency whilst pursuing, the right goal, I suppose, of consistency. Obviously, happy to connect with everybody online and stuff like that. But a little bit more about me, I suppose, first. So I was a PE teacher originally, and then moved through the standard sort of middle leadership, senior leadership, all with a teaching and learning kind of lens, and then moved into more trust roles, so executive leadership, I guess, doing kind of teacher training and then NQTs, and then more into kind of teaching and learning. And now I work across the kind of professional development space. In terms of me personally, I've done a doctorate in leadership development, specifically on self-efficacy, so leadership confidence, of which I have very little, and did a kind of meta doctorate where I was researching self-efficacy without having any self-efficacy, and that was strange. And now I'm obsessed with psychological safety, really, because I think that's an area that holds a lot of people back. I didn't try very hard when I was at school, and I got a 2-2 at university without having a job, drinking, or playing sport. And so since then, I've had a massive chip on my shoulder about trying to erase that and just chasing challenges and challenges. But I'm very conscious of my age. And so that's what drives me, really, the chip and the fact that I am running out of time. The place I work, the Cabot Learning Federation, you might recognize the name from its original kind of CEO, David Carter, who then went on to be Sir David Carter. Our current CEO is Steve Taylor. 35 schools in the Southwest, from all through schools, primary, secondary, and alternative provision. We've also got a 5 counties kind of teaching school hub alliance and a maths hub associated. As Hailey said, the plan really is to just kind of broaden your perspectives today, to drive maybe some deeper reflection about this topic, to showcase some of the stuff that I've been thinking about and some of the things we've been trying in our trust, and then really to give you enough to be able to go away and do some of your own thinking and some of your own reading. So in terms of the flow, yeah, we've done that bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of why both consistency and agency are understandable goals. We'll talk about something called iatrogenic effects. Everybody loves a new word to Google, don't they? They can go and drop it in an interview and stuff. And then we're going to look at some of the potentially promising approaches that we've tried and maybe you want, go away and try. So let's have a look at this first. And I suppose we should approach the definition. So have a read of that about agency. So, of course, the words to pick out are the capacity, so the ability to do something. Albert Bandura has done a lot of work on this and, highlights this idea that we're not passive kind of recipients of things. We want to have some kind of control, and we want to be able to exercise our will. Now, in schools, of course, typically we see that in things like curriculum design, in pedagogical choices, and in the professional development that we get. But it's not all as simple as it seems, because there are some things that kind of counterintuitive. So agency is not kind of unrestricted freedom. It's not do what you want. It's also not purely individualistic. So we're not in control solely of our levels of agency. We are affected by all kinds of environmental factors. It's not always conscious either. We sometimes have a lot of unconscious agency that needs to be brought, to our minds. And then the last one is it's not equal for everybody. So I guess we understand that not everybody has the same level of agency. But I think what's fascinating is that not everybody needs the same level of agency. Some of us, myself included, quite like being told what to do sometimes. And so that makes it infinitely complicated, which is why we need to do some real deep thinking about it. My dream, this is the cue, is for someone to take a picture of one of my slides once at a keynote. So I've put these flashy kind of quotes in on the hope that maybe someone will do that. If not, I've teed up Hailey's going to take some for me. So here we go. Here's your first one. It's an interesting idea. Whether agency is a feeling that people have, whether you can give them agency or whether you have to do things so that they feel it. So that's what kind of got me started on this next section. And as I said before, you know, the idea of kind of consistency is an understandable goal in schools. You know, in terms of external and internal drivers for that, I mean, we see, don't we, that it's not fair that kids have a variable experience at school. That's just not fair, you know. So we want some consistency. Teaching is bonkers complicated, and so again, you can see how there's a desire to try and simplify that a little bit by adding some complexity. And then ultimately, lots of us in leadership positions are held accountable for lots of high-profile things. And so one way to, I guess, meet that accountability is to bring some consistency. But it's not just external drivers. There's lots of human things that make us lean towards making things consistent. So it's quite comfortable, isn't it? When things are the same, we feel more comfortable. When we know what's going to happen, we feel more comfortable. We like having control. We don't like being out of control. And then the last one is just a pure efficiency thing. We are constantly trying in our minds to find space and to, as Andy was talking about, push things into our kind of subconscious, automaticity, habits. But we want the same thing. We want things to be as smooth as we can so that we feel like we've got space to do other stuff. So there's lots of reasons why we should push for consistency, but I guess there's also reasons why we should be pushing for agency. And the theory's obviously, you know, pretty well established on this. You know, Bandura's stuff on self-efficacy goes into it a lot. A lot of the reflective practice stuff by Schoen and Dewey, and then the self-actualization kind of stuff from Maslow really leans heavily into why this is super important just for effective human functioning. But on the kind of day-to-day, I guess, basis, we see this, don't we? And this is what, again, Andy was just talking about then, in that if we're going to get adaptive practice, people need to have the capacity to exercise their will. If we want people to be innovative, then again, they've got to feel like they can make changes, that they are in control of their own practice. I think there's strong links with well-being, and then something that Hailey is super passionate about and writing about, I know, is retention. It wouldn't surprise me if some of the work that Hailey does finds that agency is a key lever in people's kind of retention. And of course, we feel better, don't we, when we've got a level of control. So that's really a kind of an initial stab at why those two are definitely worth doing. It's not that we shouldn't be aiming for consistency. And of course, it's not that we should avoid aiming for agency. But what about this thing called iatrogenic effects then? Well, there's the definition for you. And we have lots of these in our day-to-day lives, but also in schools. There's things like high expectations. Great idea, yeah? But it can have some unintended consequences, you know? Super high expectations can lead to people being fearful or not taking risks, yeah? They filter out their ideas and their concerns because they're a bit scared of what might come, yeah? Rigorous evaluation. What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, you then start getting into situations where people, if you create the game, people will play the game. Yeah. If you measure data and certain things like that, people will create what you are asking for. And so it feels like a good idea to rigorously evaluate stuff. But if you make that your sole aim, then you then start kind of, I guess, changing people's behaviors. And we see this, didn't we, in the old school kind of Ofsted, you know, lesson observations. I was outstanding Ofsted teacher. Whether the kids learnt very much is another story, but I knew exactly how to play the game, and I recognized that there was a game to be played. And then, of course, rapid career progression. You know, we wouldn't want this, we wouldn't think there are any unintended negative consequences. But again, you then start getting this sort of inadequate expertise where people are reaching levels of seniority before they're ready for that. Yeah, they're moving at such a pace because that's what society or their organization suggests they should do. And then they find themselves actually not very well equipped. And you get things like self-efficacy dips, and then obviously burnout. So if that's what an iatrogenic effect is, let's have a little think about what that might be for consistency. So again, we talked about consistency being an understandable goal, but it may have some unintended negative kind of consequences. So if we're going to revisit this later, but if we put this idea of consistency on a kind of continuum from low to high and try to seek out what Hailey introduced this idea of a sweet spot, potentially, I think we've got three problems, which we're going to go into in a bit more detail. I think we may find that an unintended consequence is decreased engagement. I think we might find that we're getting less adaptation. And I think we might be, and what Andy was talking about was this idea that we might inadvertently be decreasing people's kind of expertise. So if we unpack those in a bit more detail, but first, another camera photo opportunity. Hailey would be pleased with my alliteration here. I was desperately trying to find a word that is take away. I thought, oh, SAPs. And so if we look at engagement almost as a kind of, I guess, a ladder, as you could call it, from low engagement on the left to high engagement on the right, with this idea that, you know, people's hearts and minds are empty at one end and full at the other. We have these sort of increasingly deeper levels of engagement. And you can read from the left, you know, defiant, you know, year 8, Thursday afternoon sort of thing, all the way up to kind of proactive. And naturally, all of our staff and humans and everything sit somewhere on that. And they don't sit there all the time. They go back and forth. But it's important to recognize that what we do with our pursuit of consistency may be having an effect. And you probably wouldn't get defiance, and you probably wouldn't get proactivity. But one of the most dangerous areas, I think, is this sort of area between passivity and sort of compliance. And you get this thing called quiet quitting, which is a phrase I've become kind of, again, obsessed with recently. And this idea that people aren't making loud noises, you know, about things they don't like. What they're doing is they're just doing the bare minimum. They are quietly just stepping back, both physically and kind of cognitively. They are creating sort of boundaries around what they're willing and what they're not willing to do, you know. They suddenly hear that sort of, well, my contract says I leave at 4:28, so I'll be leaving at 4:28 today. You get this sort of reduced initiative. People just aren't being proactive. They're not pushing because they're not engaged. And then the last one is you get this sort of false agreement, so that, you know, face to face, they agree, they nod, they say, yes, I'll do that. And then quietly behind the scenes, they're not doing it, you know. And that's a little bit of a link, I suppose, to that psychological safety where people don't feel like they can speak out against these things. So what they do is they just quietly quit. So I think that's one of the dangers, I suppose, we need to think about when we come to kind of pursuing consistency at any cost. The next one is about adaptation. So have a read of that. I wonder whether really, really excellent adaptive teaching is even possible in the absence of agency. So that's worth exploring. And when we think about kind of adaptation, we think of these sort of quotes. I couldn't find a source for this because I made it up. And then I thought it would be a bit egotistical to put my name against a quote that I put up there. I was going to choose Hailey, but then I thought she might tell me off. But if she wants her name against it, I can do that. Yeah, I think it's pretty true, isn't it? Gotta be. There's nothing else, no other business, gets linked to that. To strengthen that, Sam Gibbs wrote this recently, that we need school leaders that can tackle these wicked problems. And to do that, they need to have the agency. And that came from a report with Big Education that kind of strengthened that idea that the classroom, the world is so dynamic that we need people to be dynamic as well. And so this is definitely something that we need to kind of address. And in my mind, I was thinking about a teacher and what questions might be going through their mind at the point of needing to adapt. Yeah, and of course, this happens thousands of times during a day, but at that moment where you've noticed something and you realize, oh, this is not working for that individual or whatever it is, I need to adapt, what goes through their mind. And so the first one I think would be, what could I do? And of course, there's a danger here if we don't provide agency, or if we go too far with the consistency, we might be robbing them of the knowledge, the experience, and even the kind of capacity to know what they can do. So they can't even answer the first question of what could I do in this situation, because it's all been done for them, because there's a roadmap, because they haven't had to do the hard thinking before. They're then completely ill-equipped to even know what to do. And this, of course, in terms of professional development, is a dangerous road to go down, because we won't see the effects of this in 5, 6, 7 years. You can have teachers in their kind of 10th year of teaching that have lived through a really high level of consistency that may move, or we may have an epiphany which says consistency is not where we thought it was, and suddenly they're completely ill-equipped to deal with that. But I think more of a dangerous one potentially is this question: what am I allowed to do? These kind of environments where agency has been stripped away potentially strips away people's confidence about their own decision making. It's, oh, I know what I think I should do, but oh, is that in the template? Is that in the, whatever it is that the school's introduced? And so potentially there's a level of fear around, am I allowed to innovate? Am I allowed to change things? Am I allowed to do this? And that obviously then drives a kind of uncertainty and then a dip in confidence. Of course, the frightening thing is you can't pause a lesson and have this discussion with you. These things are going through these teachers' minds constantly during lessons. And so I think that's a dangerous thing too around this idea of decreased adaptation. So the third one I want to talk about is about the erosion of expertise. And we looked at it briefly, this idea that expertise is a combination of kind of experience, knowledge and understanding. And so I was thinking about this, about the sorts of things that we take for granted all teachers can do, but could be dangerously eroded if it's done for them. And so some obvious ones that came to mind were planning. There's a drive naturally to improve teachers' well-being and leaders by removing some of the workload that causes that lack of well-being. But again, a dangerous road to go down and potentially an iatrogenic effect of getting rid of planning. Behavior management, schools where structures and that are really, really tight and formulaic rob teachers potentially of the ability to manage their own behavior, and it's a skill that I guess we can't lose. Pastoral care, I know that some teachers now are not involved in the pastoral elements of schools, and again, for all the right reasons, but just need to keep an eye on potentially the erosion of expertise associated with that. Professional development is a classic one. In the new Ofsted kind of teaching toolkit that's been proposed, there is this push towards kind of self-regulation of professional development, staff that take responsibility, I think the phrase is, for their own professional development. Again, there's a danger that if all professional development is done too, then we rob teachers of the ability to generate their own professional development. Yeah, they get into that mindset of, I only learn things when it's given to me. So that's an interesting one. And of course, there's loads and loads of other ones, which, yeah, happy to hear things in the chat or anything like that. So all of this, I think, does some sort of damaging impacts on the amount of thinking that we're doing, or the kind of depth of the thinking that we're doing. And I guess the link to the learning stuff, that idea that, you know, probably one of the only accurate proxies for learning is that deep thinking. And me and Andy were talking just before about this idea of process versus product. And we see that a lot, don't we, with lesson plans, you know. Effectively, you should be able to just to chuck your lesson plan in the bin at the end of it, because the actual piece of paper serves no purpose other than some external validation. The process of creating the lesson plan is where all the richness is, the thinking that went into it. Same thing with these slides and presentations like today. And I think if we don't engage or continue to engage in that deep thinking, we will be stuck in a situation where people are doing stuff, but without really knowing why they're doing it or how to do it effectively. And so, yeah, some dangerous stuff. Well, let's get on to some of the things that I've been trying. Again, I've put them as promising approaches because they are starting to show some promise, but certainly not putting it out there as the kind of the solution. So if we return to this idea of a consistency sweet spot, that's probably what the real goal is. Yeah, it's not all consistency and it's not all agency. We're going to need to find the spot somewhere, and it'll be different for different people. In a moment, you've probably already given yourself a score of where you think you are, and it probably needs to shift quite a lot. Okay, but both, like most continuums, there are pros on either end. So if we look at the benefits of low consistency, we probably see some of the things that most people are used to. You know, we get increased engagement and responsibility when consistency is lower. We get a typically kind of higher level of intrinsic motivation, which leads to better job satisfaction. We certainly get more contextual specificity of lessons because people are thinking for themselves. They've got the autonomy and the agency to be able to make changes, and so forth. They are noticing and adapting as they go. Yeah, you could go into lots of different lessons and see lots of different things, and that's for the right reasons because all the kids are different. And then the final one again is you naturally get more innovation at that tail end. But of course, we shouldn't really put consistency as the baddie or the enemy in this story, because there's lots of great things about consistency as well. And I know that Alex and Matt are going to be talking about this idea of a common language, and it's super useful to be able to use the same terms across the school or across a trust. This jingle, we want to avoid the jingle fallacy. For me, there's definitely some benefits in shared professional development resources. If different schools are using the same language, suddenly you can start using the same resources. Yeah, people don't have to interpret or kind of spend any extra time. So certainly some benefits there. There is some stuff about reduced cognitive load. You know, not having to think about everything is useful. You could potentially argue that I'm going back on my fancy purple slide now, that you do need some consistency to have really excellent adaptive teaching. Because if not, how would you have the cognitive capacity to be adaptive? That's interesting. Obviously, increased consistency. This is an interesting one, isn't it? This clarity of expectations. If you're anything like me, I feel anxious and paralyzed by a lack of clarity about what's expected of me, you know? And so sometimes consistency can make it really clear to people, this is what we expect, which means they don't have to use their mind thinking about, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? So there's definitely some pros and cons on that. And again, I would imagine you've stuck yourself somewhere on that scale about what you personally feel you prefer and what might work best in your kind of classrooms and schools. So one of the things that we've been playing around with in our trust is this idea of balancing the idea of active ingredients versus deliberate differences. Now, active ingredients, you'll probably be familiar with. I think it first came around in like the EEF reports, but there's a kind of quote, I suppose, or a description. So these are the characteristics that have to be protected in order to maintain its effectiveness. So typically they use toothpaste as an analogy. So the active ingredient of toothpaste, as we know, is fluoride. Yeah, it's absolutely imperative that you protect that. If you take that out, you're not brushing your teeth, okay? As opposed to that, there are some characteristics that can or do need to be adapted to fit every specific class or lesson. So we call these deliberate differences. These are the deliberate things that the teacher is changing. So, toothpaste, this would be the color, the flavor, the, consistency, whatever. There are things that you can change that don't damage the effectiveness of the product. So if I was in a school and we talk about this, I can go into every single classroom and there is a consistent level of active ingredients, okay? But there are lots of other things that are different and they are deliberately different. And that word's really important to us because when we go into classrooms and we see things that are different, we expect the teacher to be able to defend the decisions they've made. So if we unpack it a little bit and choose feedback as an example, here are some potential active ingredients. Just have a read down that list. One of the things we say when we're sort of trying to come up with these active ingredients is how ridiculous would it sound to say the opposite? Oh, I think feedback should be vague. Oh, I think it should be given a lot later, and so on and so on. Yeah. And so you can test out these things by seeing how contestable or how kind of how much of an argument, a rational argument, could you get into. And so we, come up with those for each ones. But if we look at feedback in terms of deliberate differences, these are the things that I am definitely up for a conversation about, and I would encourage our staff to make professional decisions about. So there's nothing written in stone to say that you have to give all verbal or have to give all written feedback. It would depend on your class. I was before writing this, I was in a classroom where someone was using predominantly verbal feedback, and that wasn't what I saw in another class. And so when I spoke about it, the lady said, well, this class has got such low literacy levels that I've found that written comments just aren't, as effective. So I lean a lot more into verbal. Great. Perfect kind of example, really. You've probably read on, can't you, about the different things. The key with this, though, is that the collaborative creation of those two lists is absolutely key, okay? This is not go away, write them, and give them to your staff, yeah? In order for them to feel agency and control and engagement, they have to write them, yeah? And so with this, it says 35 schools, this is not a kind of, here you go, I've done all the work for you. It's right, okay, here's a stimulus, now let's unpick it. And a lot of our schools change the wording, they add things, they take things away. And so it's really important that, that collaborative element is in there as well. Okay, what about some self-directed PD then? This is kind of fairly straightforward, isn't it? But what about having a library? And it could be a physical library or it could be an online library. The ability for staff to go and engage with professional development that meets their interests and their needs at that moment in time. Yeah. I've put it on the left because it's probably the lowest, it's the least kind of jazzy, I suppose. And it's the least kind of, I don't know, intensive in terms of time. We've just got a WordPress blog for the trust. We call it the PD platform. And some other teams, we just curate and collate useful articles. What we're doing is we're saying, if you want to do some self-directed PD, go to the PD platform. And there's almost like, an understanding that whatever's on there has been through some sort of filters in that it's good. And we're doing some of the heavy lifting, okay? A bit more innovative, but not particularly innovative, is this idea of PD carousels. It's quite common, isn't it? This idea that you would give staff some sort of choice during a PD event. Yeah. We did the opposite of this, I suppose, would be everybody in the hall, we're all doing questioning. It's right. There are 7 workshops happening around the school, 7 different providers, different topics. Off you go. You go choose, and you might move around more than one or just go to one. Fairly straightforward. Something that's a little bit more, I guess, jazzy. I keep using that word, and I've been playing around with this idea called a PD ladder, because I think we need to recognize that different staff are at different levels of expertise in different things. And it's not a guarantee that just because you've been teaching for 25 years, you are an expert in the thing that's happening. Yeah, because there's always new stuff going on. Certainly a challenge for most NQT or ECT mentors, isn't it? Is that the people coming up now are exposed to a bonkersly impressive amount of CPD, and they're actually becoming more qualified than the rest of us. So I've been playing around with this idea of, could you, if you had to do something on a single topic, so if you did genuinely want to improve assessment for learning, yeah, rather than getting everybody in the hall and doing one level, maybe you actually sort of differentiate the PD by the level of difficulty. So maybe it is about, okay, you're completely new to this, read. Maybe it's you're further on, so maybe you review your own practice. Maybe then there's a discussion, and then maybe there's practice. So been playing around with this idea that you allow people to engage in the single topic at the level of depth that they feel either comfortable with or through their experience. And that kind of tracks expertise. So we find people saying, oh, yeah, I've just done, whatever course it is on cognitive load. So I don't need to do that. I need to go and actually have a discussion with somebody about the intricacies. So anyway, we've been playing around with that as an idea. And then the last sort of, I guess, promising, this is important as well. It's not just about giving choice, because you can superficially provide choice, can't you? Even the fact of having a carousel creates a challenge. Okay, guys, we're going to give you choice over your PD. There's 2 workshops to go to. Oh, is that really a choice then? So be careful with that, because people will, again, quietly quit. It's a bit like some governmental consultation processes, isn't it, that happen for a week over the summer break or something. So the last one I want to talk about really is this idea. I stole it from business. I heard about it, called management by objective. Ooh. This guy Peter Drucker, who writes lots of books and super I guess popular and smart, talks about this idea of flexibility within structure, which I really like. And we talked about it earlier on. It's not complete autonomy. It's not go do what you want. It is flexibility, but within an evidence-based structure. And he talks about this idea that you start off with an agreed target or goal. Yeah. You agree the success criteria, potentially the active ingredients. You make sure that it meets your ethics and values. And that's as far as you go with the consistency. What you then do is you then allow a kind of an element of flexibility that allows each individual team to get to that objective in a way that suits them best. Yeah. Different ways to get there, same goal, all aligned. So it could be that you allow people to choose the techniques that they use to reach that. It may be that you choose the timing, it may be that how they apply it, and it could be how they adapt it. I think this is a classic one for, let's say, checking for understanding. The idea is that we want every student to engage in a questioning activity. How you do that is potentially where you get a bit of flexibility. It may be that you do no opt-out. It may be that you do no hands up. But it might be that you've got a classroom culture where you can still do volunteer questioning because you've created enough psychological safety. And that's where that kind of the power and the autonomy gets given back to people. If we're meeting the objective and it sits with the success criteria or our values, hey, how you do it is up to you. And of course, they'd need to justify that as well. But it's an interesting kind of topic. So those are just three things that I've been kind of playing around with that you might want to, again, use as a launch pad to think a bit more about. The caveat for that one before we move on is that it's all very well giving people autonomy to go and do things differently. But if you're not giving them enough resources, then actually you potentially score an own goal because they then don't succeed and it has a negative impact. So to finish off, I suppose, I thought, I would literally just try to consolidate everything we've been talking about on this consistency sweet spot. I personally am there. Thought I'd stick my neck out and put it out there. I'm not in the middle. I like consistency. I like knowing what I'm expected of. I like know what I'm doing because I like being responsive. Yeah. I thought I'd be I thought again a flag in the sand and say you'll know when you've hit that sweet spot. Ready? When you have got flexibility within structure. That's a little takeaway. That your staff have got really clear mental models of excellence. We haven't unpacked that phrase, but the idea that they have a shared understanding of what excellence looks like. Yeah, that's where the consistency comes in. But they feel trusted to use their professional judgment. Okay, so there's that feeling word coming back in. But you also have a level of agreed active ingredients that improve the baseline quality. I think for me, that's where I want to get to across our trust, is that we appreciate and kind of acknowledge the variability of teacher practice, but actually we've got to a level where, there's a baseline where everybody's kind of performing to. I put toolkit stroke playbook because I think you do then need to create some sort of resource where people feel like they've got an ability to choose stuff to be able to adapt. Now, again, there is potentially some caveats here because it's such a personalized thing, agency, and it's so dynamic that even this presentation today is only the start of the conversation. You're going to have to do some proper deep thinking about this. But I definitely think there is a consistency sweet spot, and we can all kind of, I guess, find the protection of agency in the pursuit of consciousness. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. There's links there. I love chatting to people and stealing their ideas. So yeah, please connect. If you like all the graphics and stuff, I've just pulled them together into a book which is called Leadership Launchpads. Go on Amazon and get that. It's probably the best kind of bang for your buck you can get from PD. There's 100 launchpads in there for it'll keep you busy for a long time. So thanks for having me.